You keep replaying the same moment in your head. The unread message, the delayed reply, the way they went quiet right when things started to feel real. Not when things were bad, that would almost make sense. No, they disappeared when it mattered, when intimacy deepened, when your voice got softer, when your love stopped being casual and started becoming dangerous. And that is the part that breaks you. Because if they were cold from the beginning, you could call it what it was. But they were not. They opened the door just enough to make you believe there was something sacred behind it. They gave you warmth, attention, glimpses of vulnerability that felt almost accidental. They let you feel chosen. Then they turned into smoke. So now you sit there trying to decode a silence that feels louder than any argument ever could. You wonder why they did not fight for you, why they did not chase you, why they did not show up with trembling honesty and say, "Do not go. I am scared, but I care." Why they let something meaningful slip through their hands while you were still standing there, willing to stay. And the answer is brutal. Avoidants often do not fight for love the way anxious hearts expect them to. Not because the connection meant nothing, not because you were forgettable, but because fighting for love requires moving toward the very thing their nervous system has learned to treat like danger. To you, closeness feels like home, even when it hurts. To them, closeness can feel like the beginning of suffocation. That is the truth nobody tells you when you are breaking your own heart, trying to understand theirs. You keep measuring their silence by your capacity to love. You keep asking, if I felt this much, how could they walk away? But avoidant behavior is not measured in feeling. It is measured in overwhelm. And overwhelm does not look romantic. It looks like distance. It looks like confusion. It looks like delayed replies, mixed signals, emotional static, sudden coldness after tenderness. It looks like someone caring deeply, then acting like they care less than they actually do, because their system cannot process the intensity of being needed, known, or emotionally accountable. This is where the fantasy has to die. Because a part of you still believes that if the connection was real enough, they would have fought harder. If you were important enough, they would have broken their pattern for you. If the bond was deep enough, they would have chosen discomfort over loss. But people do not transcend their patterns just because someone loves them beautifully. Sometimes they retreat because of it. Sometimes your love does not feel like safety to them. Sometimes it feels like exposure, like pressure, like a mirror, like losing control, like being emotionally seen in a way they were never taught to survive. So when you ask why avoidants never fight for you, what you are really asking is this: why did not my pain move them enough to act? And the answer is painful because it has nothing to do with your worth. They may have seen your pain. They may have felt it. They may have hated themselves for causing it. But the avoidant system is wired to reduce internal threat before it repairs relational damage. The moment emotional intensity rises, the amygdala can interpret closeness as danger. The nervous system shifts into self-protection. Cortisol rises. The body seeks relief. Distance becomes regulation. Silence becomes sedation. That does not mean they stop caring. It means caring becomes dysregulating. And this is where so many people lose themselves. They mistake withdrawal for indifference. They think, if they loved me, they would stay in the tension. But avoidants often leave the tension not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and have no healthy way to metabolize it. This is why they can look calm while you are unraveling. This is why they can act fine while you are barely sleeping. This is why they can vanish after intimacy, then resurface later like nothing happened, carrying a quiet ache they do not know how to name. Their body learned long ago that dependence is dangerous, that emotional need creates pressure, that closeness leads to engulfment, disappointment, shame, or loss of self. So when love asks them to lean in, their system pulls away before their mind can even make noble sense of it. And you, standing on the other side of that withdrawal, think the silence is a verdict. It is not a verdict, but it is information. Because love you have to constantly translate will eventually exhaust your soul. Read that again inside yourself. Love you have to constantly translate will eventually exhaust your soul. You were never meant to build a relationship out of clues. You were never meant to survive on fragments, on almosts, on intermittent warmth that keeps your dopamine hooked while your self-worth quietly bleeds out. The uncertainty becomes addictive. One message gives you relief. One cold moment sends you spiraling. One crumb of affection revives hope. One withdrawal destroys your nervous system all over again. That is not peace. That is chemical chaos dressed up as romance. And once you understand this, one core concept changes everything. Silence. Not their silence, yours. Because the moment you stop trying to fill every gap they create, the power dynamic starts to shift. For so long, your pain has been making noise. Your waiting has been making noise. Your over-explaining, your checking in, your emotional labor, your attempts to create closure where they created confusion. Every bit of that noise has been telling them something without you realizing it. It says, I will carry the emotional weight for both of us. It says, I will chase meaning even when you avoid responsibility. It says, I will keep the connection alive even if you only visit it. And when an avoidant learns, consciously or unconsciously, that you will always reopen the door, they never have to fully feel the loss of walking away from it. This is why silence matters. Not as a game, not as manipulation, not as some childish tactic to make them miss you, but as a boundary, as a refusal to keep translating absence into potential, as a sacred interruption of the pattern that has kept you emotionally starving. Because when you finally go quiet, not wounded quiet, not performative quiet, but grounded quiet, something changes. The energy they relied on is no longer available. The emotional bridge you kept rebuilding disappears. And for the first time, they are left alone with what they chose. That is when the avoidant mind often starts to move. Not always, but often. At first, they feel relief. Space. Air. Their nervous system settles because the pressure is gone. No expectations, no emotional confrontation, no mirror, no one asking them to define what they feel. And then the second wave comes. The emptiness, the missing, the strange discomfort of not being reached for. Because what avoidants suppress in the moment, they often feel later in absence. Once the emotional intensity is removed, the attachment bond can re-emerge in a quieter, more haunting way. Dopamine starts firing around memory. Your presence becomes idealized because it is no longer demanding anything. They remember your softness, your patience, your warmth, your predictability, the little ways you made them feel safe without even knowing it. And suddenly, the silence they once used to protect themselves becomes the silence that exposes them. They wonder if you are done. They wonder if you finally saw through it. They wonder if someone else is now receiving the tenderness they took for granted. And that thought can burrow into them far deeper than your pleading ever did. Because pleading lets them stay defended. Silence makes them feel. Imagine it. They wake up and reach for their phone out of habit. Nothing from you. At first, they tell themselves it is fine, healthy even. Then noon comes. Then evening. Then a few days. The ego starts to twitch. The nervous system notices the missing rhythm. The person who was always there is no longer there. Now your absence has shape. Now it has consequence. Now it has weight. And in that space, they begin to confront what they never confronted when you were still trying to save the bond. Not just whether they care, but whether their pattern cost them something real. This is when some avoidants circle back. They send a casual message, a joke, a breadcrumb, a temperature check disguised as nothing. They do not always come back with clarity. Often they come back with curiosity, nostalgia, loneliness, guilt, or the sudden urge to reconnect without truly changing. And this is the part where you must be careful. Because the moment they reappear, your body can mistake contact for transformation. It is not the same thing. Missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Feeling the loss is not the same as having the capacity to repair what caused it. Wanting access to your warmth is not the same as being willing to hold your heart responsibly. And if you do not understand this, you will hand them the same version of you they left before, available, hopeful, emotionally open, ready to rebuild from crumbs. You will call it compassion. You will call it understanding. But underneath it is fear. Fear that if you ask for more, they will disappear again. Fear that if you hold your boundary, you will lose them for good. But hear this clearly. If your boundary can make someone leave, their presence was never secure to begin with. You cannot love someone into emotional courage. You cannot be soft enough, patient enough, insightful enough, self-sacrificing enough to heal a person who only reaches for connection when it is no longer asking anything of them. And that is why sometimes the real power is not in getting them to fight for you. It is in noticing that they didn't. That sentence hurts because it ends the fantasy, but it also sets you free. You do not need to keep proving your value to someone whose pattern prevents them from protecting what they value. You do not need to keep becoming more lovable in hopes that they become more available. You do not need to shrink your needs into something non-threatening just to be tolerated by a nervous system that experiences depth as danger. There comes a moment in healing when the question changes, not why didn't they fight for me, but why was I trying so hard to be fought for by someone who was showing me they could not stay present in love? That is the pivot. That is the moment your identity starts to shift. Because the deepest wound in this dynamic is not just losing them. It is abandoning yourself while trying not to lose them. It is teaching your body to normalize uncertainty, to call emotional deprivation chemistry, to call inconsistency complexity, to call your own hypervigilance devotion. No more. You are allowed to stop interpreting pain as proof. You are allowed to let silence reveal what effort kept hiding. You are allowed to walk away before your self-respect has to crawl. And yes, there is a chance they may feel your absence more deeply than they ever admitted. There is a chance they may miss you in ways that surprise even them. There is a chance they may think about you at night, replay your words, wonder whether they made the biggest mistake of their emotional life. But none of that is your assignment anymore. Your assignment is not to haunt their mind. Your assignment is to come home to your own, to regulate your own nervous system so that peace no longer feels boring, to let your body learn that love is not supposed to feel like waiting on the edge of a cliff, to detach from the fantasy that being chosen by a wounded person would finally heal the part of you that feels unchosen. That part of you does not need their return. It needs your loyalty. And loyalty to yourself is quiet at first. It does not always feel glamorous. Sometimes it feels like resisting the urge to send one more message. Sometimes it feels like crying without reaching for the person who caused the wound. Sometimes it feels like sitting in the ache long enough to realize you are not actually dying just because you are no longer being intermittently fed. That is withdrawal. That is grief. That is healing. And healing often feels less exciting than trauma bonds because your nervous system has confused chaos with aliveness. But over time, the calm becomes beautiful. The steady becomes seductive. The unavailable stops looking mysterious and starts looking tired. You stop romanticizing people who only know how to love you in retreat. You begin to want more. Not more intensity, more truth, more stability, more reciprocity, more presence. And when that shift happens, something profound takes place. You stop chasing people for proof of your worth, because your worth is no longer on trial. You stop trying to decode mixed signals, because clarity becomes your standard. You stop confusing being desired in private with being chosen in reality. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer negotiating against your own loneliness. That is power. Not the power of revenge, not the power of making them regret losing you. The power of no longer needing their confusion to end in your favor in order for your life to begin. If they come back changed, they will meet a version of you that no longer bends just because they finally looked your way. And if they do not come back, they will still have lost access to someone who loved deeply, saw clearly, and learned not to beg for what should be given freely. Either way, you win, because your healing was never supposed to depend on their awakening. So if you are standing in the wreckage of silence right now, wondering how someone who felt so much could fight so little, let this be the thing that settles into your chest tonight. They may have cared more than they showed, but they still showed you what their pattern does with care. It hides. It delays. It withdraws. It protects itself at the cost of connection. And your life cannot be built on waiting for someone to become brave enough to love you out loud. Let that truth break the spell. Let it hurt. Let it burn through every illusion that told you being almost chosen was enough. Because you were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to give it. And the moment you stop begging for emotional availability from someone organized around emotional escape, your whole identity begins to reorganize around something stronger than hope. Self-respect, self-trust, self-return. That is when your energy changes. That is when your eyes clear. That is when your love stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like a force. You do not become colder. You become cleaner. You stop pouring yourself into closed hands. You stop mistaking your endurance for destiny. You stop calling it love when only one nervous system is doing all the work. And one day, maybe sooner than you think, their silence will no longer feel like a mystery. It will feel like a limitation. A sad one, maybe. A human one. But not your burden to carry. You will look back and realize the moment they didn't fight for you was the moment life asked a deeper question. Will you? Will you fight for your peace? Will you fight for your dignity? Will you fight for the part of you that still believes love should feel safe, mutual, and whole? Because this is the real ending. Not whether they come back, whether you do. Whether you return to yourself so fully that no one's hesitation can ever again convince you to abandon your own value. And when that happens, you are no longer the person waiting to be chosen by someone afraid of love. You become the person who chooses herself so completely that anything less than real devotion feels foreign. That is the shift. That is the power. That is when you finally let go. And that is when you become unforgettable.